and welcome to Money Matters. My name is Jim Butler with Wealth Enhancement, and my co-host today is Mike Dever with Dever Asset Management. Welcome, Michael.
Hey there, Jim. How you doing?
Good, good.
Good.
So as we pontificate a little bit about the economy and the markets, as if we can predict something, let's get into a little bit of that, and then we'll bring on our special guest for today. We talked a little bit earlier about where we are so far, a little more than halfway through the year. We certainly don't want to date ourselves, but we're early, let's put it maybe about the middle of the third quarter 2025. And are there concerns that either you have at your firm or you're hearing from clients just with regards to how well the markets have done so far?
Well, so our business is actually interesting. It's a nice indicator for that probably because we have funds that our entire suite of funds that we offer, and right now in retirement plans, and we're going to be launching an ETF suite of 9 funds that replicate those in the new year, all have downside protection, unconstrained upside, but with downside protection. And a lot of people interpret that as, okay, it's got downside protection. I don't need that. And we find, regardless of whether we outperform overall, we find that people tend to be calling us when they're concerned about the markets and not calling us when they are not concerned. And right now, what we're seeing is kind of a low volume of calls. People are very complacent. They're very happy. The markets are making them money. So we're not really seeing any concern, but market just keeps making new highs. People are happy with that.
I think the word complacent is appropriate. Not that we aren't complacent, but I do think the conversations we have with clients, and to some extent, Mike, we owe our clients, just to broaden their perspective, is to understand that we're in an above average market. So for example, just to put some numbers behind that, through the end of August of this year, the S&P 500 is up almost 11%. The Dow was a little behind that at just over 8, and the NASDAQ, which is up about roughly 12, a little bit under 12. The big surprise are international markets. So you look at the international developed larger economies, UK, Germany, France, for example, that's up over 23%, again, year to date through the end of August. And then the emerging markets, which are your smaller, lesser developed economies, those are still up almost 20%. So
Right.
Clearly those are above average numbers that we see, and brings a certain degree of complacency.
Yeah, those markets obviously had a bit of a catch up to do. They've been lagging for years. The U.S. market, especially the U.S. large cap growth, has been just off to the races and leaving everybody else in the dust. To the extent where now you've got 40% of the S&P market cap in just 10 stocks. The Nvidias, Microsoft, Amazons of the world. The other 300 or 490 stocks make up for 60% of the market cap of the S&P 500. So it's really dominated by those top large, and they all tend to be large growth stocks in the S&P 500. And if they lag, the S&P or both the S&P and the Nasdaq are going to lag. I mean, it's just how it is. And they haven't lagged this year, but they definitely at valuations where it might be concerning for some people who look at such things as valuations, but it doesn't seem a lot of people really care too much about that today.
Right, right. So you had mentioned earlier about the suite of funds that you manage provide some downside protection. So that's certainly one way to address the above average returns. Are there other strategies or approaches that investors can take to help take advantage of those opportunities, which we're in a market of opportunities, but it's not going to last forever. We know that.
Right. Yeah. The funds we have 100% exposure to each of their benchmarks, whether that's like the S&P 500 or a small cap index. And then they have downside protection in addition to that, which is kind of nice. But the average investor that won't go in, it's maybe not in our upcoming ETF suite or in our CITs in their 401k plan, they can maybe skew their portfolio a little bit instead of being totally large cap growth focused. There's a lot of momentum there. You don't need a lot of exposure to get a good kick in your portfolio from that, and maybe look a little bit at some of the smaller cap or some of the value stocks that are out there, even the large cap value that have really lagged for the last decade against the large cap growth.
So I think part of that answer is also, you almost hate to say it, but it's called diversification. Diversification across different market capitalizations, different sectors, as you say, and be careful not to get overweighted. Even international, it's nice that international is doing well, but again, that's not going to last forever. So good answers.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and that's a great point. I appreciate that on the diversification. That's so important. It's the one free lunch in investing is create a diversified portfolio. And what we kind of pointed out earlier is that S&P 500 with 40% in the top 10 stocks is not a diversified portfolio in and of itself.
Correct.
They need to look beyond that today.
Yep. Good answer. Good insight. Mike, we have a question from Henry Small, who has written in. He's asking, what's new in the crypto world with stablecoins?
Okay, so Henry, that's a great question for today because just in the last couple months, there's been the biggest change in a decade with crypto and with stable coins. It used to be really the wild, wild west. You had stable coins that went bankrupt, totally underwater because they weren't backed properly or they were just had some harebrained schemes for backing their value. Um, Congress passed the Genius Act just in the last couple months, which now creates a framework for how crypto stable coins need to be managed. And one of the main things there is it requires them to be backed either by cash or say treasury securities so that there is money there that's available in these stable coins. We're going to see a rash of new stable coins launched over the next year or two. Banks, the big money center banks, are going to be launching their own stable coins. There's the president's already launched his own stable coin, of course. So there's a lot of that's going on in this stablecoin world, but it's much better than it was just a year or so ago when we didn't have that same regulatory structure in place that required actual backing of the stablecoins. We have that today.
Do you see the day coming where virtually the majority of investors will have some allocation to stablecoins?
This is a concern that the banks have right now, which is why they're launching their own stablecoins. Because even though the stablecoin, the Genius legislation came out and said you cannot have interest paid on these stablecoins, they can still allocate rewards, whatever they call it. It's essentially interest. So they're paying an interest, even though it's not interest. And the banks are realizing that we've got trillions of dollars in deposits here that we're paying subpar interest rates on. That's going to start getting sucked into the stablecoin world if they don't do something to compete with that themselves. So there's going to be a lot of changes and things happening with this over the next couple of years.
Interesting. Well, we could talk the rest of the show just on that topic, but we have a guest that's going to talk about something a little bit different. So in the meantime, you have a question or topic that you would like our panel to review. Here's how you communicate with us.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says, Send us your questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, MONEY, -matters, MATTERS, TV.com.
So our guest today is Joy Slabaugh, and Joy has a very unique approach to providing advice within the financial services community. And instead of me trying to fill in some blanks, welcome, Joy.
Thanks
Hello,
for
Joy.
having me, Jim. Mike, it's great to be with you all.
Yeah.
Can you provide a brief intro to who you are, who you serve,
hmm
and how you do that?
Yes. So I have worked in the financial services industry for a long time, and I made a career change into therapy. And while I was working as a trauma counselor, I realized that there was a gap. People were still coming and talking to me about money, but most therapists don't like talking about money. And I knew from my time as a financial advisor that a lot of advisors are allergic to talking about emotions. And so it begged the question, where are people supposed to go to talk about these really big emotions that money brings up in many of us? And so now I work at that intersection, and I specialize working with high net worth and ultra high net worth folks, helping them transform the way they engage with wealth, shifting it from a source of stress and isolation to a tool for connection, impact, and lasting fulfillment.
So, Joy, are you going to work with both an advisor or their firm and their clients, or just the clients themselves?
So it really depends on the person and the situations. There are many advisors who will refer clients to me. They still do the financial planning, and they refer the clients to me to work with some of the deeper questions around money, around their emotions of money. Sometimes people will come to me directly. They often already have a financial advisor. If they don't, I help them find one. So I no longer do financial planning for clients. I work more in a more specialized capacity where I'm really helping them understand their mindset around money and where it's serving them, where it's not serving them, and then helping them transform their mindset so they can shift their behaviors in ways that are frankly more helpful for them.
So what would you say your client base, is it majority comes to you directly, or do you get a number of them then advised through financial advisors?
It's about 50-50, honestly. Some people seek me out directly, and others, advisors, will reach out to me that they're like, hey, I have this client. I really feel like they need more support than I can offer them, that I'm trained to offer them, is what they'll say. And so I'll strategize with the advisor to think about what kind of support the client needs. We'll even work with the advisor to figure out how they introduce them to me and what that engagement might look like. And so they'll refer clients to me. And again, advisors still working with them on the financial planning. They're bringing me in as a specialist, much like you would with a CPA or an estate planning attorney.
Mhm.
Can you give an example of what that might mean, as a specialist? Obviously you can't talk about your clients, but
Yeah.
what would be a situation where the advisor would say, "Hey, Joy, I could use your help on this."
Yeah, great. So I'm going to share the examples I share are an amalgamation of clients, right, to protect confidentiality. So they're not referring to any one specific person, but they're inspired by true events. And some of the things I'll see are people who have experienced money in ways that were really harmful. And that has made it really difficult for them to make decisions around money, that they avoid it. They avoid the topic. You can imagine, I mean, you work in investments, you know how hard it is when people can't talk about money, think about money, make decisions about money, and yet they're coming to you for help. So situations like that is where advisors have brought me in of like, hey, they want me to help them, but whenever we talk about money, they redirect the conversation. How am I supposed to help them? And so that's where they bring me in, and I'll work with the client to help them understand what is actually going on around that and help them reach the place that they are ready to take action with their advisor and do the things they need to do financially.
Joy, I think what you're touching on and the services that you provide deserves so much attention because I believe that even wearing a hat as an advisor, which I have for many, many years, one of our primary responsibilities is to truly understand not only what's important to our clients, but how they think and feel about money. So you're touching on, obviously, a critical subject. You've developed something called internal family systems. What is that?
Yeah. So, and I'll clarify, internal family systems is a form of therapy that was developed 40 years ago, not actually by me, but it's actually a collection of ways that humans interact with each other. They've done for hundreds of thousands of years across all human traditions. And 40 years ago, someone packaged all of these and said, hey, we're going to call this therapy, and here's language we use, and we now have a way of training people on how to use this. Since then, this has grown and evolved and been used in a lot of different fields, mediation fields, financial planning fields, even legal fields and other fields as well. And what it is it's a way of understanding how people are organized mentally and emotionally. Specifically, it's the idea that we all have many different parts to us, and that is normal, healthy human psychology. So for folks who are watching or listening to this show, there may be a part of them that is really enjoying listening to this show, and with good reason, because it's a great show. There also may be a part of them that wants to reach out to a friend, or another part of them wants to do things on their to-do list. This does not mean that something is broken, that they want to do 3 different things at the same time, or they have 3 different desires at the same time. That's actually very normal human psychology. So internal family systems is a way of recognizing that that is normal for people. And how do you meet people in that? This really matters a lot with money, because people often have conflicting what appears from the outside as conflicting views about money. And it can be really challenging as they're working with their financial providers, that financial providers feel like, make up your mind. What is it? What do you actually want? It's really helpful to realize that that is normal, that you want different things at the same time, some of which are conflicting. And so internal family systems is a way of recognizing that that is happening, and having a way that you can meet people in that and help them resolve those internal conflicts so that they feel calm, they feel focused, and they feel able to take action in the ways that are most beneficial for them.
When you say conflicting signals, I mean, I picture all these different ways, and I'm still trying to settle in on what it is you can help the best. But somebody gets a big inheritance. Are they conflicted in they feel guilty about it, or they got all this money and they just want to be spendthrifts, or are they conflicted because, well, they want to save for retirement, but I really want to go on this European trip now, or I probably should help pay for my kids' college. I mean, where are the conflicts that you jump in there and help resolve? Because I just picture all these different emotional. I mean, first of all, I don't think money's bad. I think people definitely, you're better off if you have more than if you have less. In general, you can do more, but I can see how it could lead to conflicts. But are those the types of conflicts that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great example. So there's internal and external conflicts. So you just listed some really great examples of internal conflicts. Someone receives a big inheritance. Maybe part of them feels guilty. I can't spend this. This is blood money, right? I've heard that before. Maybe another part of them is like, well, this is my chance. I can finally do the things I've been dreaming of. But they feel conflicted. Which one do they do? So some advisors are able to help folks navigate that. Other advisors are not as comfortable doing that. And that's where they may bring me in, for example. But it's also important to realize the way money can impact external conflicts. And while I agree with you that many times life is easier when we have a bit more money, money doesn't solve all of our problems. And sometimes it creates different problems. And for example, when people reach a certain level of wealth, sometimes they start to wonder if people see them only as a walking ATM. And the people in their lives they're not clear. Is this person actually my friend? Do they actually care about me? Or do they see me as someone who picks up the check, someone who's willing to take them on trips with me? You see them as someone who can allow them to access resources. And so that can feel really isolating and lonely, and can frankly create conflicts in those external relationships. Like how do you know who you can trust when you have extraordinary levels of wealth?
So how would an advisor introduce you and your services into a client relationship where they sense there's hesitancy or something's going on and they'd like to dig a little bit deeper? And, maybe I don't feel I necessarily have quite the skills, and just out of respect, maybe I'm not the person for them to share that with, and that's fine. So how do we bridge the gap to a Joy Slabaugh in your services?
Yeah, I really encourage advisors to think about this just like you would bring in an estate planning attorney, for example, where you generally reflect back to the client your observations. Hey, I'm noticing that we're coming up against something that I think is important to address and a little bit outside the scope of the work I do. I'd like to bring in someone who I think can support you in this. And it can be helpful to reflect the behaviors you see that are impacting them. So for example, with the what the example that Mike had shared a little bit ago, the person who received this inheritance and they feel conflicted, you can reflect back. I noticed that you seem to feel conflicted about whether or not you act on this, whether or not you do anything with this money. It seems to feel conflicted about making decisions. And then that's where you share, like, hey, this is really important to address. I feel like this is a little bit outside the scope of what I do, but I know someone who does. Would you be open to me connecting you with someone who specializes in helping people like this? And then that's where it can even be a warm introduction. With advisors, I've done joint meetings where they do a warm introduction, or there's ways, there's a lot of different ways we can do that depending on.
Do you have an example of a success story where, it's kind of, you probably have many, but in general, without naming names, can you share,
absolutely.
success story?
So I'll share a situation of someone who had a healthy net worth, and they were really afraid to spend it to extreme degrees that they were wearing shoes that had holes in the soles, and they were not buying new shoes. And they had, way more money in the bank than they needed. And so in working with them, we're able to help them realize that to them, money means safety and security. And they were so terrified of touching their assets because they were afraid it would erode their ability to be safe and secure. And they would end up, living in a box on the side of the road eating cat food. And so as we were able to recognize the emotional meaning that money had and address that, because, emotions we can address in a lot of different ways, then it's actually started to change their attitudes toward money. And they began to feel much more calmer and more ease around it. And they actually ended up starting and funding an endowment that as they were able to feel safe and secure, separate from their money, then they had the freedom to use their money to bring their values to life. And they set up and funded an endowment. And they also bought shoes that didn't have holes in them.
So do you have a minimum wealth type client, or is there a certain sweet spot where you can, provide the best benefit?
Yeah, I specialize in working with ultra high net worth folks. And so if folks are open to it, I will work with people at many different asset levels, but where it's really hard to find people who are able to approach the ultra wealthy from a place of calm neutrality, right? Many folks are either envious, they wish they had that themselves, or they are resentful. And, there's the eat the rich mentality. And so I really specialize in meeting people where they are from a place of compassion. And it's hard to find when you have more than 8 figures in assets, for example, it can sometimes be hard to find people who are able to meet you with that calm neutrality and help you work through the really complicated emotions that wealth can bring up.
Do you find, Joy, that people in that ultra high net worth category have a hesitancy or resistance to trust?
I do find that many times people are guarded, that they've been used for their wealth before, right? People sometimes treat them like a walking ATM. And so that can impact their relationships in all aspects of their life, their personal relationships, their friendships, as well as their professional business relationships. Yeah, I absolutely see that.
Do you ever run into, are you doing this jointly with families, or, situations where you have husband, wife, the kids? Are you usually one-on-one, or are you doing this within a family environment?
So it depends on what they need. I often work with people one-on-one. I also work with folks in couple situations, and as necessary, we can bring in other family dynamics as well. As you know, sometimes multi-generational dynamics in wealthy families can need some care and attention. And so I really try to meet people where they are and provide the support for their system that really works the best for them.
Could that help as well for an advisor who is concerned with the passing down generational? They've got the relationship with the patriarch of the family, and at some point that money is going to be inherited or passed down to the other family members. how do you help them maybe establish that relationship with those younger family members?
Yeah, one of the things that can be really helpful is having conversations with each generation about their values around money. And that can help identify where there are similarities in values and also where there are differences in values. Many times these things go unspoken, and that is what leads to resentment, to, well, frankly, it can blow up relationships. But when we're able to help people bring words to their experience and then support them in having conversations with each other around that, then it can take this scary subject and make it a little bit more approachable and actually bring more ease into the relationships.
And if those high net worth individuals and families did the kind of work that we're talking about, in your opinion, what kind of societal impact would that have, and how would, we be better off, them better off, and other people potentially? You mentioned an endowment as an example.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, right? There's individually, people feel greater calm. They feel more fulfillment when they are able to bring their wealth into alignment. It also impacts the relationships in their life, that there's less strain and tension in those relationships. How many of people know families that have had ruptures due to money? There are a lot. And so as we do this work, we can have richer, more meaningful relationships with the people in our lives. And also, we can have a greater impact in their communities and world around us. And I personally believe that money is a tool, and it can be a tool used to harm, and it can also be a tool used to help. And as we transform our own relationship with money, and we're able to bring our wealth in alignment with our values, then we're able to have a transformative effect in our communities and even the world around us.
I think what we're also touching on is very broad, because I was with a client yesterday who said that, he grew up in a family where they did not have much money, maybe more middle class. So in other words, they did not inherit anything from their parents, but yet because of what they've been able to do, they're in a position where they're going to pass on something, doesn't matter what, but they're passing on. And it's a concern that they pass on a legacy to their kids. And there's that snowball effect that has started and will continue for sure. So we've reached the end of our time limit, and as is pretty normal for us, we could certainly keep going. And I can't say enough about how applicable I think this subject is. So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Hope you've picked up a few things that's worthwhile. Our next guest is going to be a gentleman by the name of Evan Stewart, who's an attorney who does a lot of work at the Supreme Court level. And as long as you enjoy listening to attorneys, and hopefully he's an exciting one, you'll learn a little bit more from him. And as a result, thanks for listening, and bye for now.